When I was 4, my father called me in and said, "There's something on TV that I want you to see." You know, this didn't happen very often. My father wasn't really that kind of person, especially not with me. There are reasons for that. I don't want to really get into right now. Maybe a later video. I'll talk about it later. Maybe, I don't know. But he told me this was a historical event that had never happened before. So I sat down on the floor with my legs crossed like a little kid will, and I looked at the TV, and I saw a rocket on a launch pad, and I thought, I've seen rockets before. It wasn't really any big deal to me. You know, they've been going on, you know, my whole life. I didn't understand what was happening. Then my grandmother came into the living room, and she handed me a small sandwich bag with raisins and Cheerios and some mixed nuts in it, and said, "Here, you're going to need this." And I'm thinking, what am I going to need this for? Then she took a black label 12-pack box and slipped it over my head so that I was looking out the eye holes. And I'm thinking, what is this all about? And she said, "Well, you can't go to the moon if you don't have a helmet and astronaut food." And I thought, go to the moon? What are you talking about? I'm not going to the moon. That's way up there. What the hell? Well, I watched the rocket for a minute, and the announcer was talking, and he mentioned that this was Apollo 11, and that it would be taking the first men to the moon, and I was excited. I mean, that moon is a tiny little thing up there in the sky. People are going to go to it. And I thought, wow. So I watched. And then it came to the countdown, 10. Half a second later, I said 10, 9, another brief pause, 9, 8, another half a second. I was on a half-second delay because even though I knew my numbers forward, backwards was hard. And then suddenly liftoff. We have liftoff of Apollo 11, and I was on my feet jumping around and screaming. And I got to tell you, you don't want to scream when you're wearing a beer box on your head because it gets really loud. But I didn't care. I was ecstatic. Pretty soon, people would be walking on the moon. I ran outside and looked at the moon, and there it was. It was up there, small sliver of a moon. Looked kind of like a cloud in the early morning light. It was about 9:30 in the morning. I ran back inside and I sat back down on the floor and just watched the trail of smoke disappear into the sky on the TV. And I thought, that is amazing. And suddenly, for a 4-year-old, I felt a connection. And not just the kind of connection you find with a family or a neighborhood or a community. I felt as if by this one event I was connected to the whole world. And that's pretty amazing for a little kid. And later on, when we went grocery shopping in town, I felt that connection even more when everyone stopped and asked my father, "Did you see the moon launch? You know, did you watch them go up? Where do you think they are now? You know, how fast do you think they were going?" And on that day, it even seemed that the opinion of a 4-year-old mattered when they asked, "What do you think of it?" And I thought, well, it's okay. But how really does a 4-year-old describe an event of this magnitude? And it's simple, succinct, to the point, skip just to the highlights. The rocket went up and people will walk on the moon. And that's how a 4-year-old would say it. And that's pretty much what I said to these guys. And every time a newscast would come on or a news break or whatever, and it'd show the Apollo astronauts, I'd be sitting on the floor with my beer box on my head watching. Just in rapt anticipation, because I knew any time they'd be landing on the moon. I didn't know it'd be 3 days.
The lunar module cutting itself free from the command module, beginning the maneuvers which should place it on the surface of the moon.
Roger, Eagle, done dock. Roger, how does it look? The Eagle has wings. Houston, you're a go for landing, over. Roger, understand, go for landing. 30 feet, 2.5 down. We're drifting to the right a little. 30 seconds.
Oh, jeez.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
We're home.
Man on the moon.
Boy.
Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute.
There he is. There's a foot coming down the step.
I'm at the foot of the ladder.
Armstrong is on the moon.
Yeah,
Neil
step off the lamb
Armstrong,
now.
38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon on this July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Well, for thousands of years now, it's been man's dream to walk on the moon. Right now, after seeing it happen, knowing that it happened, it still seems like a dream. Man has landed there, and man has taken his first steps there. I wonder just what there is to add to that.
Later on, standing outside with my brother, he looked up at the sky and he said, just imagine there are people walking around up there right now. And I didn't have to imagine because I'd seen him land. And I said to my brother, how far away is the moon? And he gave me a number that I use today, and it's the only number statistic that I carried with me from 4 years old. He looked at the sky, and I remember just the look on his face when he was just staring at the moon. And he said, in that faraway voice, 240,000 miles. Wow. Really? Really? I'm only 4 years old. I can just barely tie my shoes. What the hell, Ed? Give me an example. Is it farther than to Grandma's house? Is it farther away than the next hill? I mean, how far away is 240,000 miles? A little 4-year-old mind can't encompass that. Are you out of your mind? Well, I didn't say that. I didn't even really think it. But it would have been nice if I could have. But instead, I asked him another question that really kind of made me wonder. And that was, why does the moon shine? And he said, because the light from the sun is reflecting off the moon. It's bouncing off the moon and into your eyes. And I thought, that makes sense, except I know that the moon isn't a mirror. It's all rock and dust. And how does light reflect off of rock and dust? It can't. And he gave me some bullshit answer about the sun being so strong that light reflects off anything he hits. But that made me think. And I asked him, can we see the astronauts? And he said, no, they're too far away and too small. And I thought, that's ridiculous. Can't even see the astronauts. And then it dawned on me, because of what he said earlier. I had what I could almost describe as an epiphany. It was simply that if the moon is reflecting the light of the sun to me, and the astronauts are on the moon, wouldn't their light also be reflecting to me? Of course it would. So in a way, I guess we could see the astronauts on the moon. You just couldn't pick out the individual photons that belong to those astronauts. But that's just, how a 4-year-old thinks. I can see the men on the moon because I can see the light being reflected off them. And I wondered at that point exactly how many people also had that thought. If I'm connected to the whole world at this point, through this one event, wouldn't there be more than one person thinking that? Possibly. Possibly not. And I told him what I was thinking about the light reflecting off the moon and the astronauts, and in a way you could see them. And he smiled down at me because he was about a mile taller than I am, and he looked down at me and he tousled my hair, which he hardly ever did unless I said something or did something that he was proud of. And he said, now you're thinking. You're wrong, but you're thinking. And he turned around and walked away smiling. At 10 years old, he knew everything. And now he only thinks he knows everything. But aside from that, he's a good big brother. And I remember that in the end, I would run out and look at the moon, but I'd never look at the moon again in the same way. It was always closer. It wasn't 100 gazillion miles away anymore. It was there, and if I could stretch far enough or stand on something high enough, I could reach it, I could touch it. I knew that it was attainable. And I also, from that event to To this day, every time I look at the moon, I remember fondly back to when I was 4 years old. And that almost homesick feeling you get when you remember a fond memory, a memory of a person or a place or an event or whatever that you get, that you wish you could go back to that time again. But I stood there for a while, and I was looking up at the moon and imagining Neil Armstrong just strolling along on the moon in a t-shirt. It was a balmy 75 degrees. I know, because I was an astronaut. I was warm where I was, so it must be warm where he was, too. I mean, that's the logical connection you make. That was one of the best events in my life. And it was connected to the house that we lived in. And I lived in that house until I left to join the Navy in 1984. And that old beer box and I went to the moon a number of times after that. Well, until it turned to dust. But my memories of that event are sharp, as if I'm still standing there in the front yard of that house as a 4-year-old on that day, July 21st, 1969.